What happened in 1989 came very close to creating a major problem in the United States. We were lucky. We basically missed a bullet.
It's not just something in a science fiction book, but something that can happen.
What we've seen in modern times is not anywhere close to worst case.
Hello, I'm Trent Eric, and how much do you know about the sun? We know it sits 93 million miles away from Earth and that it powers practically everything we do in our daily lives. But it's also one of our planet's most dangerous enemies. Each year, each month, almost each day, the sun throws us for a cosmic loop in the form of solar storms that so far we've been able to survive. Tonight, I, along with the rest of the Local 10 weather team, will dive into the mysterious phenomena known as solar weather.
For as long as there's been a silver screen, the movies have been devising ways to destroy the Earth. But what if a society-ending disaster played out on the streets of South Florida instead of in a theater?
And what's being done to detect and prepare for potentially dangerous solar strikes? Never before have scientists had so much technology at their fingertips to study the sun. But will a new solar shield help us avert disaster?
So what exactly are solar flares? What about solar weather? Believe it or not, though it's been lighting our way for millions of years, we know very little about the sun and its secrets. Secrets that can change our way of life in a matter of seconds. The sun, the shining star of our solar system. It provides us with light, warmth, and life. It also thrills us with amazing fireworks called solar flares that visually blow away almost anything we see on the 4th of July.
A solar flare is a very rapid and brilliant eruption of energy from the sun, and it's caused by the magnetic fields that hold that energy becoming unstable, and they actually release the energy, and in doing so they produce this very bright, very intense phenomenon that's called a solar flare.
But those same solar eruptions, so beautiful to see, are also the trigger of dangerous weapons that bombard us far more often than you'd think. Some of those eruptions, called coronal mass ejections, send off huge explosions of electrically charged particles and magnetic fields that travel to Earth, in some cases in just minutes, and can possibly make life as we know it very difficult.
What essentially our power grid is, it is an enormous antenna, okay? So it senses these changes in the Earth's near space and generates currents, electric currents of its own. And it's really those extra electric currents that flow in the transmission lines that are the source for potential problems.
There are some vulnerabilities to critical technologies that are caused by solar eruptions.
Those critical technologies include the electronics we use each and every day, all the way up to the computer-based operations of the electrical grids of the power companies that keep our country on the move. All are technically at risk to those violent solar storms, meaning that the things we take for granted could be zapped offline.
Our country is dependent on the electric grid. It's what keeps health systems, transportation systems, water systems, banking, and so forth afloat.
And if you think a massive power shutdown is just far-fetched nonsense, remember this has all happened before, many times. The most famous occurrence came in Quebec, Canada. On March 10, 1989, scientists witnessed an enormous coronal mass ejection. When the solar storm reached Earth 3 days later, Canadians learned a quick lesson about the sun and its dangers.
The power grid went black for about 9 hours, and 6 million people felt a space weather event.
I think the fact that as recently as 1989 we saw this for real makes us realize it's not just something in a science fiction book, that's something that can happen.
And there's a chance that a somewhat major storm could happen sooner rather than later. The solar cycle operates over 11-year periods, and right now, we're currently on the uptick of a high activity span. This year alone, we've been inundated with alerts of space weather headed our way. We've been safe so far, but amassing knowledge of our friendly foe 93 million miles away will go a long way towards keeping us safe from the sun's dangers.
The real challenge is to try to discern out of everything that we can see on the sun and all of the eruptiveness and all of the data that we have now, of all of that stuff, which of it is the stuff that's really going to have an effect on our planet. And that's a real task and a challenge I think we all struggle with at times.
And Quebec isn't the only North American city to feel the wrath of a severe solar strike. Back in 1859, a massive geomagnetic storm hit the United States, a strike so severe that several telegraph operators suffered hand burns when their equipment malfunctioned. Coming up, real threat or Hollywood fiction? How would the worst-case scenario of a solar strike play out here on Earth? It's a disaster unlike anything you've seen at the movies. Coming up next.
Armageddon, Independence Day, and War of the Worlds. Ominous titles to some of the most popular disaster movies Hollywood has ever produced. But there are those who know the power of the sun who say that those movies will seem like kids' stuff when compared to the worst-case scenarios of a powerful solar weather impact on Earth.
Prepare the world for bad news.
They are scenes from our favorite disaster movies. Made to frighten and entertain. But what if a threat to the Earth wasn't just a Hollywood script? What if it was 100% real? For some, a direct hit by a space weather event, be it a solar flare or coronal mass ejection, would be the recipe for the ultimate disaster.
This has become perhaps the largest global threat we're facing. But I think there'd still be issues with how do you deal with food.
Avi Schnur, founder of the Electric Infrastructure Security Council, is a believer. A leading proponent of preparing the planet for a solar strike, Schnur doesn't hold back when it comes to alerting the public.
If we had a very long-term blackout over a large region of the American continent, the European continent, the consequences are unthinkable.
We've all experienced blackouts at one time or another, but the worst case scenario of a solar storm attack would mean lights out, all power out, for a long period of time that would cause breakdowns far beyond mere inconvenience.
We could have a regional blackout lasting years. Let's try to put this in human terms. It's Sunday morning. You get up, you get out of bed, you feel very well rested until you look at your digital alarm clock and realize, wait a minute, why didn't the alarm go off? In fact, the clock isn't working. Your toilet no longer flushes because the sewage system isn't working. You turn on the radio, radio doesn't work. The cell phone doesn't work. You go in the kitchen and, coffee maker isn't working, darn it. Open the refrigerator looks actually pretty warm. So you go to the local grocery store to pick something up. Well, the grocery store is not functional because the ATMs are down, the cash registers are down, there's no power. Within 3 days, the food is gone from the shelves and it's not coming back. You find out very quickly that traffic is gridlocked because a few percent of the cars out there are no longer working. The cars that are still functional can't get refueled because the gas stations aren't working. Transportation stays down. Medical care is gone. There's no communications. The telephone systems are not working. What you have is a societal crisis which just grows and grows.
of our experience with disasters, we've learned one thing, that in times of great crisis, we do not rise to the occasion. National security.
Arizona Congressman Trent Franks is a strong supporter of shoring up the country's power grid before a solar event, instead of spending to rebuild afterwards. With the lack of a national standard, the 300 power companies in the U.S. make their own decisions about whether to heed solar storm warnings, an astounding fact that Franks uses as he walks a thin line when expressing his concerns.
To state it accurately is to be called some sort of an alarmist, because the implications are profound beyond the imagination in many ways as far as the potential. The reality, only God knows what will happen.
The fear is that our electrical grid is built with equipment that is not easily replaced. Should transformers give out from a solar flare or CME hit, the replacement times needed to get the grid back online could be measured in months, if not years. For their part, the power companies don't seem too concerned when it comes to solar weather. Florida Power and Light told us solar storms can potentially impact transmission facilities and communications, but the exposure to FPL's service territory is expected to be minimal.
I think you will find some people who have managed to convince themselves that, hey, this won't be too big a problem. Unfortunately, that optimistic, hopeful attitude is not supported by any of the government studies.
Commissioner Cheryl LaFleur of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington is well aware of the threat from the sun and the divide between those who say we're prepared for a catastrophic hit and those who say we aren't.
There are no regrets solutions that we can start to explore now as we can still keep studying the problem, but there are things we can be doing now, particularly with the new parts of the grid we're building, that under either scenario will protect us.
I thought we'd have more time.
Doomsday scenarios are commonplace at the movies, where we've all become callous to the images of our world being destroyed by aliens or asteroids. But the odds of a major solar strike, while small, are entirely real.
The crazy thing about this is that this is a major countrywide, potentially global disaster, which doesn't come out of Hollywood. It comes out of the White House. It comes out of the U.S. Congress. All of the relevant agencies of the U.S. government are all saying this looks like a Hollywood disaster movie.
Now, while the people you've just heard from admit that the odds of a damaging solar strike are indeed small, they remind us that the chances of a monster tsunami or an earthquake devastating Japan were also considered to be small once upon a time.
Straight ahead, can technology help us prepare for a severe solar strike? How scientists are working day and night to shield the planet from the sun when we return.
Since it only takes hours or at most days for severe solar weather to reach the Earth, the window of time we have to prepare for a strike is incredibly small. But with new technology coming online each and every day, scientists may soon be able to stretch that window and decrease those destructive odds. Just outside the nation's capital sits NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. And deep inside this massive campus, you'll find the Heliophysics Science Division. And it's down this ordinary-looking hallway, lined with all things sun-related, where Antti Pulkkinen is hard at work.
Well, the Solar Shield is the next generation forecasting system.
Pulkkinen is the point person charged with overseeing NASA's Solar Shield project, a program designed to bring space weather prediction to a whole new, more detailed level in an effort to further protect the Earth from solar disaster.
It's really pushing the envelope in terms of using the solar observations using the large-scale numerical simulations and new computational power, all put together to provide next generation forecasts.
2, 1, and liftoff of
Since 2006, NASA has launched 3 satellites into space, with their sole responsibility being the 24/7 study of the sun.
So that's really the core of the Solar Shield project, and it's to push the envelope in terms of our capability to forecast the impact on the grid.
The SDO and twin stereo satellites transmit real-time images of solar events that make normally reserved scientists act like it's Christmas morning.
Seeing this taking place right then at that very moment, I mean, it doesn't get much more exciting than that, because you know that you have something.
The Solar Shield team is continually working and updating because their window to make a proper space weather prediction is sometimes only 30 minutes long.
We're taking pictures every 10 seconds.
And since it's their job to alert the nation's utilities of an upcoming solar strike, every second counts.
Our part is to provide the specification of the space environment conditions. We pipe it in a type of information that can be used through this interface, and then it's really up to the end users to decide what they actually do with that information.
And while we've already shown you what may happen should the power companies ignore NASA's alarms, the man in charge of it all isn't heading to an underground bunker just yet.
We understand the system well enough that we can tell that world will not come to an end, okay? But of course, there are still a lot of gaps that we need to piece together in order to improve our understanding of the system and improve our capabilities to forecast the behavior of the system.
The next and hopefully final step for scientists who study the sun is to learn how solar flares and coronal mass ejections are actually formed. If that secret is revealed, we could know well beforehand whether a possible solar weather strike poses any threat to our well-being.
When we return, how safe are we when it comes to solar weather, and what else needs to be done to keep the Earth safe from potential disaster? That's coming your way after the break. The sun. Majestic, awe-inspiring, and dangerous. We've learned how to harness its power. Now we need to learn how to harness its rage. As scientists discover more about our shining star, it's up to our country's power suppliers to prepare for the worst.
Many companies have emergency plans in place so they would know what to do if this happens.
This is a problem because for this particular threat, we cannot wait and measure exactly how bad it is by letting it happen without protecting ourselves.
My thought is, given what I know about the potential after effects, that my time, rather than spent on preparing for such a tragedy, it should be spent on preventing that tragedy, and that's what we're doing.
There are short-term solutions, but it's long-term planning that will keep the U.S. and the world safe for centuries to come.
Some of the actions that we still need to take are making sure we're building the next generation of equipment as robustly as we can to withstand the currents that could come from solar storms.
We have to find a way to protect ourselves based on the forecast, based on all the government studies, without waiting till it happens. That's hard. It's always difficult.
Solar flares. Are we at risk? The answer is as complicated as the sun itself. Those who fear the worst-case scenarios are considered alarmist, while those who downplay the odds are thought to be putting their heads in the sand. What we do know is that solar weather exists, and if our country or the world is not prepared for the perfect storm, our beautiful planet Earth may be a difficult place to call home.